Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Stoic Fellowship podcast, where we discuss running local Stoicism practice groups and tips on how to do so. This is meant for Stoic facilitators and anyone interested in perhaps becoming one. My name is Patrick Barry, and today we're joined by Phil Yanov. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And yeah, so thanks for joining us, Phil. We're going to talk a little bit about his thoughts based on his experience running many local practice groups of various sorts, um, about how to grow an existing stoa in a good, sustainable, organic way that leads to a good, healthy stoicism community. So welcome, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Patrick, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you for doing what you're doing. I think together maybe we're helping some folks run local stoas, and I think, getting wisdom out in the world. It never needed it more than it needs it right now.
Oh my gosh, yes, I'm reminded of that today again. Yeah, so yeah, do we want to tell everybody who doesn't already know who you are a little bit about yourself and your background and your experience with running these local groups?
Yeah, I mean, why talk to Phil Yanov at all? And I get that a lot, right? So, of course, I run conversations with Modern Stoicism, and we've run a couple of dozen of those events now. I mean, at the time you and I are recording, I think there are 24 of those under my belt. We got another one coming up this weekend. So, but I run the Conversations with Modern Stoicism events. And so that's kind of a stoa. We bring people together, they talk to each other, and it's a little random in some ways. But the idea is you hear from a trusted speaker, and then we put you into breakout rooms to talk to other people across the world about Stoicism and about your practice of it. And so they kind of learn from each other. So that's most of what I'm doing around this group. Um, and then I think one of the reasons that people might be interested in some of the things I have to say is that in my professional career, I've been running groups for 17 years. Last night, I ran my 700th in-person event in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had about 80 people inside in that room. And the idea in this case is to bring them together to talk about tech. But the ideas that I've used in building these groups over the years kind of play back and forth pretty well.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who have started a group. In my experience doing so, I've run one here in Pittsburgh and I ran one in San Francisco when I lived there. It feels like it's not too hard to get, a dozen or so people involved, maybe a little more than that, and maybe 4 to 6 to 8 sort of regular attendees. But then getting it to grow beyond that is sometimes a challenge. I've seen any number of meetup.com stoa pages that have ostensibly, I don't know, 1,000 members, and then you look at their meetings and there are four for any given meeting. So that doesn't seem like maybe the best way to do it. What have you tried, and what have you feel like are the things that have worked and the things that haven't worked for you in terms of really growing it into a more kind of vibrant community?
Yeah, I think, for any group, who is in the room matters than how many are in the room. And having folks who, where you're getting the culture right is really pretty important. So I think it is, you can be at whatever space. I want to respect that, right? So it might be that six people is the right number of people for you to have meeting, right? Or maybe it's nine. But I think it changes at various sizes, and you have to figure out what you want that to be. And having grown, quite a few groups, and I got some of them right, and I got some of them wrong over the years. I kind of pulled some lessons out of that. So I think in terms of this, one of the things we say is, think about the culture that you're trying to create. Who do you want to hang around with? What do you want that to look like? And, that's kind of how you start making sure that you get the right people in the room. Because like I said, I think you can have a great event with six people, but if you want to build it to 60, you're going to have to do some other things, do some new things.
Well, that is a good point. Maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves to even like assume that growing a stoa isn't itself a good thing. There are, pros and cons to a smaller group, to a smaller number of people having a conversation versus larger. Um, what are your thoughts about? I guess it kind of people might have their own opinions about what they are wanting to achieve and what kind of a group they want to have. But is there
Yeah,
anything you might want to
let's
say
use a
generic?
stoic lens. let's put a
Yeah.
stoic lens on that, right? I mean, this is a role ethics kind of a thing, right? For its virtue ethics and its role ethics. So maybe it seems right that the universe has called upon you to get six guys around in a pub or cats or whatever in a pub and do that. And that's the right size for you. But maybe it's your thing is like, yes, I can naturally grow it. Here's the thing we don't want to be is, you and I don't think we're not hustle culture cats, right? So we're
Mm.
not saying, hey, you just got to build this thing and it's got to be bigger, better. Now, I love having impact, and I have built some pretty significant groups over the years. Um, but that's kind of where I am and in the space that I'm working in, and it's just kind of work. And like I said, when you do it naturally, I think that works. But I do what I do not, I want to help people grow to the size they think they can be and they would like to be. What I do not want people to do is to be discontent with the people that, with what they've got going on.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I will say from my own experience that often my best experiences, the best, evenings I can remember of the groups that I've run are when, I maybe expected more people, but it ends up being four people, but then it's a really good, intimate conversation. Um, on the other hand,
Yeah.
or even sometimes when one person shows up and you have that one-on-one chat that's just you really go deep and it's you really get something out of that. And that can be fantastic versus having 15 people all waiting their turn to speak and it gets harder to have an organic conversation that way. Um,
It can't. Right.
yeah, but so I'm gonna assume that people who are still listening at this point have some interest in growing their stoa, and I can imagine reasons why. For myself, like one thing that I think is a benefit to being a little bit larger. For one, it's just a little more of a going concern in terms of if a few people drop out, it doesn't suddenly start to like, disperse and evaporate, right? A little more sense of momentum and continuity in a slightly larger group. I also personally
Yeah.
really enjoy the diversity of people. It seems like often when there's a smaller group, it tends to maybe be some of your friends that you already had or people who maybe feel an affinity for you and I'm it's great to have a discussion with other people who maybe fit my demographic, but I really, really enjoy when it can be a wider range of ages and backgrounds and oh, there's your cat.
Have a cat.
Um, and a larger group can facilitate that, right? Can be that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So,
So I think that's great. And so in that thing, you got to decide, right? How many folks do I want in the room, right? We did an event
yeah.
last night. I had 80 people in the room. So that style of conversation is completely different than having six people around a table. And by the way, what I needed to do to make that happen was very different, right? I mean, to put that kind of group together. And so, as you pointed out, if I get to 15 or 20 or 30 or more, not everybody is going to be talking all the time, or you can't say you got 30 seconds and you got 30 seconds because you just do the math and that just doesn't work out. It's got
Hmm.
to be a different style of thing that's going on. And so,
Hmm.
but you'll fit, let's say you're going to figure out the structure, what the meeting looks like after the fact. Let's start now by saying, okay, I want to grow it. And I like what you're saying, right? So, for example, in that event, like I ran last night, um, I always feel like for that event, I need to have a minimum of 30 people in the room. We're right now between the 60 and 80 mark most of the time. So that's kind of works out really well. But if think I need to have that, then I have to go through the mechanics that make that happen. For me, that's building an email list, right? I don't think there's any other way to do this other than find people, get them on an email list and send invitations and remind them what you're up to on a regular basis. But my thing, I don't use meetup.com. I mean, I'm not against it. That's just not my tool. I use Eventbrite, but in that tool, I use Eventbrite to kind of remind people what we're up to and send them repeated reminders and talk about what we're doing and all that kind of thing.
Hmm. Well, you say find people. That seems like that's sort of a therein
Yeah.
lies the rub. What have been your strategies that have worked for you and some that didn't in terms of like finding people who are um I guess
Yeah.
more than just
That's
sort of like people who will drop in once and then disappear, you know?
Yeah, so well, I mean, I don't know that I can help that, right? And so one of the things I think we have to know in whatever group we're running is that we're not for everybody.
Hmm.
So by the way, and you might even have other people who are interested in Stoicism, but you just can't kind of wrap it around for the cat that's looking for what you're looking for, right? So, for example, if you're doing a large general audience event, you are not going to attract and retain academics unless you've provided some very special role for them, because there isn't a great conversation for them to be had in a general audience. I mean, for them, it feels like work. And so it's probably not the thing for them. I mean, unless they just happen to be disposed towards that, right? William O. Stevens is an academic, right? 30 years at Creighton. And he loves going to meetup groups where people just talk about Stoicism, right? And it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. So, but the thing is, how are we going to grow this? And so let's talk about a thing that I think that does work, right? And that, by the way, helps you preserve culture while you do it, because that was the first of our 10 commandments, if you will, about what we do about creating a group. But first one's culture. But then as we go out, let's figure out how to invite people. So I'm going to flip this on its head because I do other things with other groups. But let's imagine we're not going to put out Facebook ads or even build Facebook groups. I wouldn't recommend either one of those in the moment. But I think we need to find other people first. And the way we do that is we start with the folks that we know that we think might be up for this. Right. And by the way, I think we have to wear this. It's kind of useful. I'm about to say something that's also contravention to some directive that Epictetus gives in the discourses, but you almost have to wear a little bit of your stoicism on your sleeve, and you do that not to tell people that you're a philosopher, but that you're interested in stoicism. So if they're interested, it's okay to come up and talk to you about it. Right. So I run events and I have friends that show up at things like I had no idea you were interested. And I say, oh yeah, I saw you post a thing on Facebook or whatever. And it was just me saying I'm interested in it. And so they showed up. So I'm not preaching to them. I'm not delivering philosophy to them. I'm just saying this is a thing I think about. And if you'd like to think about it with me, come hang out. So I think that's part of it. But what I talked when I did this event for Kellis there a couple of weeks ago, is how can we create an invitation campaign that we draw people in who are probably naturally inclined to do this, right? And I'd to say that, if you've got a group of, let's say, even 8 people now, and say, how many of you would be willing to go through your contact list? I wanted to say Rolodex. I'm not even sure people know what that means anymore. But how many of you would be willing to go through your contact list and find 3 or 5 people that you think might be a good fit for this and create a personal invitation to have them come join you sometime and just check it out? And my guess is these events are all free to attend and all the rest. You're not asking them for money. You're not, hitting them up for something. You're saying, look, we're interested in people who would like to have a good conversation about what the good life means. We think Stoicism is part of that. Would you be interested in discussing this? And then maybe you tell them a little bit about what the meetings look like, or you don't, but you just ask them if they'd be interested and kind of draw them in one at a time. But I think, if you had half a dozen people sending out, 5 emails each and inviting folks in, you're going to get some number of them. Some will stay, some will not. But the idea is you can grow this over time to like-minded people. And the thing is, they might not even be, they might not be serious in their stoicism, right? They might be a stoic curious. They might be, we see a lot of people, for example, who have done some Buddhism and maybe some other things, and they've played around with some ideas. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. They're seeking, right? And so they're seeking and they're looking for one thing or looking for another. And maybe what they find, that's worthy of their time is to spend time with you. And I think, by the way, the thing that we never said, we didn't even say this last week when I was doing this other presentation, is the way that you keep people is by delivering something that they value. And so I don't know, it sounds like weird hustle culture stuff. They're still not trying to do that. But I'm saying if you deliver a conversation that people remember and ideas they remember, they'll come back because they're like, "Oh, I don't know where else to get that. I don't know where else to get thoughtful conversation about philosophical stoicism. There are not other people that are talking about the good life in a way I think that works for me. And these cats do. So I want to go hang out with them and see what that means."
So you began that by saying that this is one strategy, asking people, basically going through people's network, like people's networks, the people who are already in the stoa, and that's a way of growing that in a way that preserves like the culture of the group. You mentioned that a couple times already. Can you say a little more about what you mean by that? What are you thinking of when you say like the culture of the group?
Well, some people are good fits and some are not. And the thing is, when you do this, some will come and they'll test it and it just doesn't work for them and it's okay. They don't like the sound of your voice. They don't like philosophical stoicism. It doesn't resonate for them for one reason or another. There's something in their lives. So when I say culture, I think that there are a few things, and we didn't bring this up, or maybe I brought it up when we talked, but in here, right? So there are a couple of things you have to say to establish culture. So my culture, one of the bits of my culture when I create a group is that we want to create psychological safety in the group, right? And we do that by having a few set of guidelines for everybody, right? So one of those guidelines was we assume positive intent, right? That's a Rogerian idea, but the idea is that, you know, I don't know, you might have said something that sounded like it was a knuckleheaded idea, but let's use to our benefit a little bit of Socratic intellectualism and say, well, he thought that was right, and maybe I should query that a little bit and figure out why he thought that was a good idea. Or if I do need to nudge him to some other place, or I think it's useful to open his thinking, then let me ask a couple of good questions and see what else might be on their mind about that. So, but I need to establish that as a culture, which is the opposite of there's this cat that shows up and he's like, he wants to preach to you about something every time you talk to him, right? That's not a culture of us learning together. That's a culture of one guy just spitting out his ideas again and again and again and again in a way that may even be abrasive or just don't work. And again, he might think that's okay for him, but that is not good for facilitated conversation to have one person dominate it. So in culture, we establish all of these rules of facilitation. So the first one is assuming positive intent. The second one is assumed confidentiality. If anybody says anything that seems like it ought not to be out in the world, then you don't say it out in the world, right? And you certainly don't attribute it without permission. So you get all of that stuff. So in this bit, the third rule that we always use is we try, and this, by the way, is kind of a modernist corollary to Socratic intellectualism is we replace judgment with curiosity. And that says, rather than look at someone and say, well, I think that's stupid, you look at them and go, okay, I don't understand. Tell me more about that and see if you can elicit their thinking. So those are three rules we use to create an atmosphere of psychological safety. And that's the culture that I want. And apparently, Patrick, it works because I have people look at me all the time and go, oh my God, you've created something here I can't find at any other place. I was like, okay, that's what I wanted to have happen. I want you to feel free to have a conversation in here and feel like we're people who are supporting each other.
So do you do things explicitly to try to encourage that kind of atmosphere and that kind of culture? And
Yes.
both in terms of originally when the group was small and maybe in particular as it begins to grow. Are there, um,
Both. And
yeah.
so one thing is, for example, as I'm nurturing a group and I'm trying making sure the culture gets established, I repeat the rules at the beginning of every meeting. This is the way we're going to talk to each other. And so we create a little thing. And by the way, when I say rules, they're guidelines, because we're not rigid. We're talking about virtue ethics for goodness sake, right? So in this spot, we always come at this as kind of guidelines. We say, look, if we follow these guidelines, we can have a great conversation. And by the way, if you're not comfortable yet, just listen for a bit and see what this looks like. And you can decide whether this fits for you or not. But, we're here to help. So there's some other things that will show up over time. Um, and you can just and you can work your way through that as you do your own group. But the idea, so I have a couple of groups that I nurtured very intentionally. And my thing is, I repeat the rules at the beginning of every meeting. Do it very quickly, but these are the guidelines that which we're going to follow. And the idea is we're going to facilitate a good conversation because that's the goal here. We are trying to sharpen all of our thinking by thinking together.
Yeah. And so by going through people's like known contacts, their friends, maybe even family, that's one way of trying to grow in a way that maintains that shared understanding, that intention, that way of approaching the conversation. Um, that'll take you to a certain point, and I guess you could say that you could just sort of rinse and repeat with that. those new people could that I'm trying to think of
Couldn't you?
whether
I
is
mean,
that like
I know you want to tell me this doesn't work, Patrick, and I hear you, but I
I'm
think you
just
can grow this as much as you want doing this technique.
yeah.
And this thing you put it is exactly what you said. You can keep growing. The other thing is it helps you grow at a reasonable rate because there are little things you could do. You know, I do a lot of TV work and I do stuff on radio shows and stuff like that. And those really are kind of incrementalist because now none of those have the market they used to have. But the thing is, you really only want to grow this kind of slowly, right? Once you get the core group, you want to grow in like 10% increments and so forth. Because if you grow any faster, it's hard to maintain culture. And so it can get away from you pretty quickly. And, you know, the thing is, you could do that if you've got a lot of help, but if you don't have a lot of help, it's better to just have this thing kind of grow like an ordinary thing, not get big, crazy, and then just like, and now I've got, you know, imagine if I doubled in size. Let's imagine I had a 30-person group and I doubled in size and I got 60 showing up now. First off, you're going to, hey, this is really cool. And then you think, I got 30 people who don't know how we do things here. So that means I have to work really hard to go back to my culture steps. So maybe those three rules take longer to say and I spend more time with them. But I do this because I'm building something that I don't want to break. And the thing that I'm building, it doesn't have to be great. I mean, it doesn't have to be super fluid and move very quickly. It has to help a whole bunch of people kind of move through their lives. And they're going to do that pretty slowly for the most part as it is, right? I mean, behavior change takes a long time for most people. And so I'm building a thing that I want to be robust, not that I want to be fleet, if that makes sense. Svelte. Still, that's not the word I'm looking for, but I don't need it to be super quick and moving. I need this thing to be robust because I want it to build, I want it to last.
So this has worked for you, this approach. Are there any other approaches that you just especially did not work for you that might be worth cautioning people against?
So, you know, in fact, and I did this meeting last night, I did the very same thing. I have a certain bit of shtick that I always do at the end of the meeting. I said, look, this room isn't big enough for everybody. I want you to invite only the best and brightest of your friends. So I think a thing in there is to continue that bit and let people know it's like, I can't grow this thing too big too fast, and but I do want you to go out and reach out. So I encourage people to do outreach every month for the following month. And we encourage that. You know, we do some other things like, so for my main groups, LinkedIn is a way I communicate about that. So, you know, now it's at the point where, of course, I take a few pictures while I'm there, but everybody in the room is taking pictures saying, I saw with Phil, or I saw this person, or I saw that person. And the point of those things are social proof and the social sphere, you know, building out for their own people so people recognize that they're there.
Yeah. So have you done anything at all with, I don't know, you mentioned you don't use meetup.com, but have you done anything with advertising, or is this kind of word of mouth approach really the only way, the main way of going about it? For example, I put
I
up
sup
flyers. I put up like physical flyers around the city in certain places that I just as a way of finding people that I wouldn't find otherwise. And I put up a very
yeah.
simple website that people could find if they did some Googling, but just as, entry points. What's
Yeah,
your thoughts
so
on
I
that?
like the idea. I think some of that can work, and that's kind of cool. It's, you know, and again, depending on you do so much of it and how much of it works, you know, how many people show up, that thing could be good. So I think that's neat. Um, have you ever thought about printing out like something that looks like a bookmark that's got information about your group and sticking it among the philosophy books at a bookstore? Um, and just sticking it in alongside the books. And I know people who've done that for a different kind of group, not philosophy groups, but for other groups. But the idea is to kind of let people know what's going on there. You know, your local library or local libraries, because we all live in places that have tons of them. But the question is, can you do something through them that lets people know? Because as we know, philosophy people, Stoic people, they're readers. So what can I do inside that space? So I like that. I like all of those ideas a lot. So yes, I think when you get people together. And so some of this is just kind of fun and maybe it feels like a little bit of service, but some of this is going to bring some people in. And, again, I just can't over explain the value of just posting a few photos on whatever you do for social of the people there. And again, this is the way you build culture. Remember, Seth Godin says culture is people like us do things like this. That's how he defines culture, right? So one of the ways we do that, we provide social proof by saying, look, here's 6 people, 8 people, 30 people, 60 people together doing this thing together, and they're excited about it. Do you see could you see yourself in this picture?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't take advantage of that enough. But it does seem like things like the bookmark trick and other interesting ways of getting the word out could be ways of counterbalancing what might be a tendency if you only went through people's friend networks of, like I was saying before, not like having less variety in the kinds of people who attend. You know, people tend to be friends with people who are
Yeah.
somewhat like themselves, and there might be
Yeah.
a danger in that approach of being a little homogenous.
Well, it can be, but the thing is, I have done things to kind of encourage diversity in some of my groups, and some of those work kind of well, and some just fall flat. And I mean, I've tried, and I run events in multiple cities, and in some cities, the diversity play just never works. I can't make it work. But that event that I did last night up in Charlotte, oh my gosh, so incredible. I mean, diverse across any spectrum you could imagine.
Mm,
This group had it, right?
mm,
Other than we were all English speaking, but there was quite a number that wasn't their number one language, right? It wasn't their first language.
mhm,
But the point is, so we built quite, so I think part of the environment is that. So yes, I laud and we try to build diversity into our events. I get it, what you're saying. I think that's
mhm.
right. I mean, let me just counterbalance that, Patrick, with two things that are going on. There's a tension between people coming again and again, as well as having fresh voices in it. So I always like, to me, I've done this right. If about 15% of the room is new voices or fresh voices, somewhere between 10 and 15%, that's all I need for regular growth. I'll keep half of them will decide this was too much trouble or whatever. But that way, if I grow it, I think that kind of thing works.
Yeah, fair enough. You mentioned before something about Ten Commandments of what was it, of running a group, or the first one was
So let me
structure. I
take,
was curious what that's about.
yeah. So, when we met 2 weeks ago or whatever, and we did this thing for Kellis, then I came back with my own notes and I put the notes together and I sent them to Kellis. And then I said, wait a second, what if I think there's something here we could use. So I converted it I took the notes and I rewrote it. And then I said, okay, let's make something fun out of this. So I've not shared it with anybody except you right now and said, I wrote the things that I called the 10 commandments for a successful stoa. And so the first one is thou shalt cultivate culture before numbers. That was the first commandment.
Hmm. Are you up for sharing more of that, or any
Yeah, no,
highlights? We don't have to go through them all unless you want
no, no.
to. Yeah,
I was going to say whatever you'd like in this. I'm happy to send this to you. Happy to have you post it. I think this is
sure.
something here, but this was my first draft at what might this take. So this number two was thou shalt grow through personal invitation, not mass proclamation. And
Mm,
so that was my thing of saying, let's start by building culture. One of the ways we're going to build culture is we're going to make sure that we're inviting people that will understand what I'm trying to get done, and they're positively predisposed to us to begin with, right? So I'm going to start there. And again, once I get a core group, then I could just grow, right? This is like, I don't know, maybe it's like a sourdough bread or something. Once you get that starter going, you can kind of build it, kind of a thing. So that was number two, and I think that works out pretty well. Number three was thou shalt honor the sacred progression of group size. I think there are magic numbers, right? And I kind of explain this. I think the first number is 5. I think the next one is in that 9 to 12 space. Then it's 20 to 30, and then it's bigger than that. And the thing is, how you manage the group changes at each one of those levels. And you have to think about what you're going to do. I cannot, I ran a group for a long time that was 12, 12, 12, 12, 40. And when it got to 40, it was different. And I had to manage that group differently. And the rituals I had built for a group of 12 did not work for a group of 40, right?
mhm.
As an example. All right. Do you want me to continue or
Yeah, I
what?
mean, while you're at it, I think you got my curiosity up here. Let's hear it.
Yeah. So number four is thou shalt maintain unwavering constancy in gathering, a persistent, predictable presence. If I'm going to meet the second Tuesday of every month, I meet the second Tuesday of every month. By the way, I've got a group that's met the third Wednesday of every month. I've been doing it for 17 years, the third Wednesday of every month. And we almost never break it. I mean, once every couple of years, something happens. But I think that is a thing that if people might be interested in the idea of what you do. They do not want to have to chase you. Do not move it around from place to place unless you have to. Be predictable so they can find you. And by the way, you asked me earlier, had I ever done this wrong? Oh my gosh, I've got some stories about how I did that wrong in my early days of one of my groups. They don't want it, the audience doesn't want to chase you. Number five is thou shalt embrace the tools of organization. I suggest Luma, MailChimp, Eventbrite. I think Meetup works really well, but I think having tools that people can use and find and understand. And by the way, I don't care. Well, I care a little bit about which of these you use. I think some work a little bit better than others, but I also think you can train your audience in 3 to 6 months about how you talk to them, and they will accept that and continue going forward after that on whatever platforms you pick. Um, the only thing I think that most people don't realize is you need an email list. You cannot count on social to do your work for you. You need people's emails and maybe their SMS or telephone number, SMS, something like that. Um, Thou shalt guard the gates of membership with wisdom. Every once in a while, you're going to have to invite someone to not be there. Um, I've had to do this twice in 2 years or 3 years, I guess, of running another group. I've got 400 people, and I've had to say, I don't think you're a good fit for people who couldn't figure out they weren't a good fit themselves. Sometimes you have to do that. And by the way, the group loves you for nurturing them. In fact, the last time I did this, someone in the group came back to me and said something. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to use that." And they said, "If your job is to protect the village and a wolf comes in, you got to get rid of the wolf. That's your job. That is in your role as the person who's building this group to protect the village."
Can you say a little more about what made you realize the need for that? What was it about? And obviously not without, you don't have to get into details of who it was or anything weird like that, of course, but like what was it that made them a wolf exactly?
Yeah. So, while I told you what the rules were, we're going to have positive intent, regard, and we're going to, be curious and all the rest. He wouldn't follow those. And
Hmm.
so I said, no, this is the way we talk to each other. And he's like, well, no. And this guy responded to me, well, my job is to be a gadfly. It's like, I get it. That role is not open here. We are going to be the kind of supportive organization that we need to be to nurture each other as we go forward. I don't need someone in that role.
Hmm.
And I ended up 2 or 3 times trying to guiding them back to what the principles of our organization were and just wouldn't follow it. And I said, okay, we have to be done. And I
Yeah.
let him go.
I've run into that also for another reason. People who basically take up all the air in the room, who start talking and don't know how to stop. And
Yeah,
I will actually meet with people for coffee before they join the group, partly just to kind of brief them on what the group is and how it operates. But it's also slightly as a little bit of a filter to one person I met just spent the whole time talking endlessly about their work and the things that they were doing and never noticed that I wasn't, it was off topic. And anyway, right? Like people who can just destroy a conversation by making it all about themselves and just never shutting up. Another example of like someone who will tarnish the quality of the group for everyone else.
Patrick, that's absolute wisdom, right? And the thing is, I'm here to shepherd the entire flock. And this means
Yeah.
I'm gathering all the sheep, right? And
Yeah.
that means that I can't have just one overrun this, right? And so, yes, I think that's right. And so this sometimes, you know, we might come to shepherding these groups because we want to be loved, and that's probably part of this. But part of this is we have to like show this for everybody, and we have to say, there are people inside our group. I can think of the same thing as like, what, and so you have to cut them off. I really appreciate your thoughts. Let me make sure, I said, I really appreciate what you're thinking. and thank you for sharing. I want to make sure I have time to get to everyone. So let me end this piece here and we're going to come back around. And if we run out of time, I'm coming back to you. I want you to know that. So this respects them. Remember, people are looking for two things. They're looking for a sense of significance and a sense of community. And you can do both of those things inside your groups. And that's what you're doing too by being egalitarian at some level,
Yeah.
right?
And I guess it's worth saying in both these cases, there was an attempt to coach the person first before just, there was a attempt to correct before, before saying, sorry, I think this isn't going to work. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'm looking for people to enroll them into our rules. And if they can't enroll, then we'll do a gentle enforce. And I do it usually twice, maybe three times. And then it's just like, okay, we can't go, we cannot continue because this is not something you want to be a part of using the rules we use.
sure, fair enough. Okay, what's your next commandment?
All right. Seven, thou shalt nurture the self-sustaining flame of culture. So you will know that you've got culture right when you see people in the group saying it to each other. And so this is the piece where and you have enough rules or enough guidelines. I don't want them to be rules. We're not rigid, but we have guidelines. But in this space, we have enough guidelines that the audience starts saying it to each other. So I'm going to give you an example of a guideline I use inside of our WhatsApp group. We say that if you are going to reference a quote by one of the Roman Stoics, particularly, you have to reference it book and chapter. And the reason I do this is because there's so many bad quotes out in the world that are just not useful and they're not stoicism. And Seneca never said that, and Marcus Aurelius never said that, blah, blah, blah. And we just said, this is not we don't have time. And I'm not going to go chase sources for you. You go chase your sources. And it took me about a year to get everybody to figure out this is what we meant and how we meant. And of course, you always get new people. But now, somebody came in recently and said, well, I don't see why we have to do this. And before I even got back to them, there were three other people inside the group that explained why this rule was useful, why this mattered. And I've had people come to me and personally say, I love what you're doing. It slows everyone's roll down. And that means that they're paying attention to what they are doing. And so that's an example of if you build this self-sustaining flame, then the group will begin doing the group's work without you. And you need that.
Nice.
It's called a self-weeding garden. I didn't use that metaphor, but that's also called a self-weeding garden.
Hmm.
Eight is thou shalt balance the eternal with the novel. So, you've got core rituals. By the way, we want ritual inside our group. We do certain things every time. Why do we do that? Is so that people have a sense of temporal stability, right? So over time, you build things, and these become the milestones of their lives. And it's funny. Like I said, I did last night. I ran my 700th event. Do you know what I had show up? I had people say, "I remember event number 300, which we did many years ago." But it's like, "I remember event 300," and they would bring tokens and coins and things that reminded them that. But in this thing, that's this eternal. Now, the novel, we did a couple of new things last night, but the idea is I'm going to keep you interested because we're going to add a little bit of spice in this that you didn't quite expect. I built trust. We do this stuff every time. And then here's this bit at the end, which you didn't quite expect. And you might love it. We'll see.
Nice. Can you say
So,
a little, before you go on, can you say a little more about, you mentioned that you all do rituals, and I think that word can conjure very different things for different people. Can you say a little more about the kinds of things that you do?
yeah. So, again, but group size matters, right? So, in small groups, we have a ritual of checking in. And so if I'm running a group of 12 people or fewer, I will adjust the time accordingly, but I will get the group to check in. And I have a check-in ritual. And so we call it rose, thorn, bud. And so I say, give me a highlight of something you're doing, give me a thorn, something that's a challenge, something that's eating at you, working on you, et cetera, kind of thing. And then a bud, something that you're looking forward to, and then give us a number. So this is just, and I've used lots of different ones. So for example, at a larger group, I'll cut that back. I'll say, just give me a rose and a number as an example, right? But the idea is I have a check-in ritual. And so we do that in small groups where everybody does it every time. And I give them, again, I base the time based on the number of people, what's going on. But I might say you've got 30 seconds to do it, or I might say you got 3 minutes, depending on the number of people at the table. But that is an example of a ritual that people get. I have a ritual at my Tech After Five events, and I always, when I address the audience, which I do about an hour and a half or 2 hours into the event, I look at the audience and I go, "This is Tech After Five number," and I pull the number out and I said, "Pow." And the audience always applauds back, right? Every time, because they know when I am there and I explain what we're up to, bang, that is your part to be part of it. So that has become a ritual and people know it and expect it. And it's funny, a friend of mine walked up to me, not last night, but a month ago, and he said, "You tell the same stories every time." And he just means those little bits there. He said, "And it works. I don't know if anybody else could get away with that." I was like, "Yeah, this is the ritual they're expecting. And I do this so that they remember where they were and what they were up to." And repetition builds in the important part.
Yeah,
That's
those
an
sound like
example of ritual.
yeah, those are good examples. I mean that helps I think to clarify in my mind what you're talking about because some people might imagine something a little, more elaborate and contrived and perhaps forced and maybe awkward people I've seen people make attempts at creating ritual in a way that is a little overwrought perhaps. It sounds like your examples are a little smaller and you know
Yeah.
um anyway that those are great examples.
Yeah. We're not
Uh
indoctrinating you into the Eleusinian mysteries, right?
We're not walking around with
Yeah,
candles and yeah, whatever.
that's much
Yeah.
harder, much harder.
Robes and masks
Yeah.
and I don't know what yeah. Um so what number are we on now? Was that
Yeah. Next one's nine.
yeah.
So thou shalt, and it's, we've kind of hit some of the pieces, but this is important to remember. Thou shalt confront discord with courage and clarity. If there's a wolf, fix the wolf. Do not let this fester. Do not let this become a problem over time. Solve it right away. Now, it's nice when the other people help you and they will, right? But do it with courage and clarity, and the group will love you for loving them because that's what you're showing. You're showing courage and justice I mean, we're talking about virtues, right? You're showing courage and justice. And that mix is powerful.
Nice.
All right, number 10, remember the ultimate purpose of your gathering. Thou shalt remember the ultimate purpose of your gathering. So, as people who think about ethics and virtue, we are here for the telos in this space as well, right? Why is it we are here? And our goal is to transform the people in the audience. I'm sorry, let them transform themselves, give them the tools and give them the tools, allow them the agency to affect their own transformation. And my role is never that of the hero. I'm the guide. I'm the trusted guide. And I'm going to add one more thing on top of that and this came up last night as I was talking to somebody in a group. I said, I never see myself as the sage, the guy that's that's like showing you the way. I am the patient in the bed next to you, and we're both trying to get out of this hospital alive. So that's my thinking on that bit. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's number 10.
That's
Yeah,
a
sorry.
that is a great point. Absolutely. Um yeah, those are fantastic. We yeah, I hope that you will put those up somewhere where we can link to it perhaps in the show
I
notes here
will.
if you're willing. Um thanks for sharing that. Those are excellent. I wanted to ask a little more, and I think we have about 10 minutes left here. So if you have the time, I'd like to ask a little more about you keep coming back to this central what's been central for you of building an email list. And
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear a little more about how you go about doing that, maybe just even in practical logistical terms. I also wonder about, maybe if there's some things what not to do in terms of, over spamming people to where they start ignoring your emails. Like, is there kind of a decorum or that you try to observe, or just any tips that you would provide in how to do that effectively?
Yeah. Collect them everywhere you can and anywhere you can. So if you're using Eventbrite or you're using Luma or Meetup, actually I don't know how to do this on Meetup, but I know how to do it on Luma and Eventbrite. But I get email addresses for people because they said they want to be in it. If I have a website, for example, like Modern Stoicism has a website, and historically over the last 5 years or so, we get roughly 300 people a month who just go, I want to be part of your thing because they see their, they read something on the website, decide they want to be part of it. So that's another thing in there. But collect those email addresses because this is how you have conversations with people and you talk to them. Now, here's in that spot. Okay, how do I make this worthwhile, right? So I suspect that most people run groups don't have a lot of time to like spit out wisdom and all that kind of stuff on a regular basis. But you can tell people about the events and explain what you're doing and when you're doing it and be clear about it. So I build an email list. I do it through all those techniques that I just gave you, as well as folks who just find their way to me and I'll go, oh, hand me your card and I'll make sure you get on the list. Or here's the link right here. I've got it on my LinkedIn profile. Go grab the, get on the list or whatever. So I put it in a bunch of places where people can find it. They turn themselves in, and this then allows me to talk to them. If you're running a monthly event, you probably ought to be talking to people every week. Um, at least 3 times a month, kind of a thing to let them know about the event. Maybe let them know what's on your mind. Let them know who's going to show up if that's part of your shtick. But yeah, I think you should probably talk to them regularly. How often is too often? If you got nothing to say, don't say it. But if you've got something, if you can be helpful to people, hand that to them. Give them that little gift. I mean, an email, no, nothing was harmed, right? No animals were harmed in the creation of this email, kind of a thing. So the cost of sending it, the cost of looking at it or deleting it are pretty small. So I think we should treat that like that. Most people are worried about sending too much. I do not. I just
Yeah,
try to make sure that what everything I send is useful in some way to the audience.
I was going to say something about reminders. I guess some of those platforms like Luma do the reminders for you. One thing I've noticed is I've
Luma and
sometimes erred on
Eventbrite
the side
both.
of not sending messages in a way where people need to be reminded that it's tomorrow, that the meeting is tomorrow, and that like you assume that they're on top of their calendaring, and the reminders can be helpful. But yes, some of those platforms do that for you. Um,
Yeah,
I have a I've been debating myself whether to encourage people in the group, the members of the group, to use that email to post to that email list themselves. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on fostering that kind of dialogue, maybe even just like link sharing, hey, I came across this cool podcast by the Stoic Fellowship or whatever. Uh, do you have any thoughts about whether to open up that email list to members to post to each other, or do you
I
feel like
don't do
that
that.
is that a
That's a
is
mess.
that a can of worms?
That's that's inviting disaster because
Mm,
the part of it is don't forget. I mean, all of us, particularly if you have as the group grows, right, you're gonna have people at all spectrums, right? So at the very early part, there's people who think this is cool and this is good, and because you're sitting here on the path, that's probably not a useful way to look at that problem. Not even the right words. Maybe that's not a good quote. So I do not.
mm.
I don't think that's a grand plan. Now, I've created discussion groups. I think you can do that on a variety of tools. I'm using WhatsApp. I'm not super keen on it, but I think it works well enough. I mean, it's work, but you could use a discussion for people who want a little something every day. You could let them talk to each other that way, and they can decide whether they want to turn that on or turn it off.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Phil, I wonder if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that you feel like we should cover while we're discussing this.
Um, I think the trick is to see yourself doing this for a while, right? The definition of great in my book around events and doing things is to be good enough long enough. And I think that you just have to keep at it. And so I really love what we're doing. I love the groups that we're building. I love the stoas. I love the groups that I've done. And so I genuinely wake up in the morning thinking about how to make this better. How do I make it easier for people to come? How do I make them easier for them to understand? What messaging should I be talking to them about at this moment? And make it worthwhile to them. And the other thing is by increasing the number of touch points that you do inside of a group, um, that helps people understand who you are and how what your thinking is like better because they're not guessing. Someone hears from you rarely, they're kind of guessing what are you up to or what are you thinking or are you thinking at all. But if you're talking to them on a pretty regular basis, they're going, oh, yeah, I like the way these cats work. I like the way they talk to each other. I want to be part of that.
Nice. I love it. Well, thank you, Phil, for all of that. So for people who'd like to find out more about you, where can they find you online and what would you point them to?
Yeah, I don't know if this is video or audio or what you're going to do, but actually, I've got a link to me right on the page. So you can start with my name, philyanov.com, and it'll just lead you out to all of the other stuff that will tell you about me. Again, this is going out to this to Stoa people, right? So, we're doing this thing called Conversations with Modern Stoicism. I don't know of anybody who's doing anything like what we're doing. I would love for you to come check it out and tell me what you think.
All right, excellent. Well, Phil, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Patrick. I appreciate what you're doing.